my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Breach? Stick around and find out. Doop, 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 doop. Doop, 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 doop. Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Breach. The synopsis, on IMDb reads, on the cusp of fatherhood, a junior mechanic aboard an interstellar ark to New Earth must outwit a malevolent cosmic terror intent on using the spaceship as a weapon. Okay. Wow, this is a really... Go check out a trailer for this one, maybe, if you haven't yet, before you watch my reviews, so you can get an appreciation for what I saw, and then I'll tell you what I experienced. The story, the script, the pacing, the tone, as far as what this animal is, we're on a spaceship, we can't get off the spaceship for whatever reasons, and there's a monster loose on the spaceship. So it's that story. You've seen that a bunch of times. The script I thought was fine. I didn't think it was filled with hokey lines. There was one character that, he seemed to have, some frequency of hokey lines, but it wasn't a script that I was like, oh, eye-rollingly bad or whatever. It's not doing much of anything original. There was one interesting sci-fi concept with these holograms that would represent people and kind of would communicate with other people on the ship on their behalf. Like Bruce Willis at times was using this holographic representation of himself to communicate with somebody while he's doing something else. And so the hologram they're seeing isn't necessarily him, what he's doing in the moment, but it does seem to represent at least his voice, but then attaches just a holographic version of himself. I don't know, it's a weird concept that almost seems accidental. I'm like, that's kind of odd, what's going on there, But that's the closest thing I could think of right now of something original being done in the script. It's very, very standard. The characters are very basic, but I want to touch on the actors now, because I really do think that this movie, what it has going for it, is really resting chiefly on the actors. It's one of those cases where the actors elevate the material that they're using. There's a number of familiar faces. There's Bruce Willis, and that's maybe the only name that I could... Thomas Jane, and those are probably the two big names. And then there's an actress who did some supporting roles stuff in movies about 10 years ago or so. I was seeing her in some things, and then she kind of just dropped off the radar, as is the case with a lot of female actors that are getting kind of leading roles or lead supporting role type things. Once they get out of their 20s or 30s or whatever, if they haven't really hit it big during that time, they can kind of really easily fade into obscurity and just not be offered the roles that they used to. And so I wonder if that's kind of the case with her, because I saw her for a while in things 10 to 15 years ago, and then I haven't seen her in anything in a while until this. But she's a fine actor, and that's how I felt about all the cast. There were several other faces that I was like, oh, I've seen him. There was the guy that was playing, technically I think he was playing KG Beast. He was in the Batman vs. Superman movie. A supporting role. You wouldn't know that was his name, but that was the character from the comics that he was supposed to be. And one or two other actors that I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen them and stuff. And so it's this really surprising assortment of familiar faces, in addition to at least two celebrity status actors. And I felt like they held up this material, all of them, through their performances, even when the lighting, the sets, the cinematography, all those things are falling short of what you would expect from a movie that these particular actors are involved in. I was never emotionally engaged in the movie, but I at least wanted to see what happened to the characters. And I think that is... that credit belongs to the actors for how they portrayed these otherwise pretty simple characters. The thing that really makes this movie stand out as surprising when you contrast who's involved in the movie as performers is all the visual aspects of this. All the production values look so cheap. It really looks like an early 2000s Sci-Fi Channel alien movie with a celebrity cast, And Sci-Fi Channel, they at some point figured out that, like, oh, the movies we make aren't that great, so let's lean into that and make comically bad sci-fi movies. This didn't feel like that. This felt like a movie that didn't realize that it was bad. It was really, they're really going at it with. I mean, the actors are not, to my mind, phoning it in. They're really seeming to be treating this material very seriously. It's just all the production, all the production values beyond that really can't stand up with their performances, and so the sets look very cheap, relatively speaking. I mean, it really does remind me, and I don't mean this as like an insult. I just mean, like, this is like how I would describe it. It really reminds me of what you would see in a made-for sci-fi channel movie in the early 2000s, and now and then you could find something that was a decent way to kill an evening, and wasn't like going for the comically bad thing like a Mansquito or whatever the crap, but it would still be cheap looking or TV quality looking, and ultimately when you're done watching it, you forget about it and move on. So it's weird. I almost I almost could believe maybe 10 years from now that this was being made purposefully with that kind of look. Like maybe 10 years from now, that look will be retro in the same way that like 80s stuff is kind of retro now. But being made right now, just not quite far enough removed from an early 2000s thing, it just kind of looks cheap. It's really, there's got to be a story here. There's got to be a story as to why these particular actors are involved in this project. They had to know or see the signs, at the very least, once they got on the set and were performing. They had to kind of know what kind of movie they were in. It's really interesting to me. Hopefully they were having a great time and they just kind of involved in the characters and just taking enjoyment from being in that kind of story, even though the caliber of the production was much lower than many of the movies that these actors have been in before. The CG, the green screen, at times I was like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing the film grain, what looks like film grain of the back. They're about to walk right into a green screen right there. Really, very unusual. The action and fight choreography is sometimes almost non-existent. The camera seems to cut away at almost every opportunity where it can avoid showing anything that would take significant time, effort, or money to produce. And so in place of fight choreography, there's just some shaky cam, and like the camera seems to kind of like get knocked off right at the moment where you would want to see a big flying kick land, or when someone's explodes into guts and stuff, we cut away to see the reaction shot while we hear the sound effect. And so it's all kinds of things like that are just cutting corners all over the place. It's really, this is on a meta level, this was a fascinating movie to sit down and watch. Let's see, as far as, I don't always comment on music or sound, but I will mention here that the sound balance does seem off at times. I don't think the sound production falls as short as the visual elements do, but sometimes the dialogue was a little too deep in the mix. Thought it was fine, it worked fine most of the time. There were a few brief moments where the score came through. I was like, oh, okay, that's a nice touch, but there was a number of times where I was like, oh, some score right now would really help make this scene intense, but it seemed to just be leaning on sound effects and stuff, and so yeah, really, really interesting. As far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might stimulate some worthwhile thought or conversation? I don't think so. Again, because, as I've said with other movies that I don't react to well, I think that in a movie that you're unlikely to take seriously or to be emotionally engaged in, the themes are not going to be as relevant or as persuasive potentially. If there is a kind of a moral theme of some kind, it's maybe bringing up the question, does humanity deserve a second chance? These are humans that are on this space ark because Earth has gone to pot. There's a plague that's taken everybody out, basically. They're taking these series of ships to a new planet they're colonizing called New Earth, and there are some of those among humans that believe that humanity doesn't get a second chance and would even like to sabotage the efforts of these arcs to restart humanity somewhere else, because humanity is just proven to be self-destructive and destructive of the planets that they are, given reign over. And so what's interesting to me about that kind of theme when it shows up is usually the answer is, but we can do better. So the idea of is humanity worth preserving? Is humanity worth keeping? Preserve? Did I say preserving? Yeah. Is humanity worth preserving or giving another second chance to? So the worth of humanity is tied to deeds. And that is how I think, as far as like what comes to mind right now, that's how I think every system of philosophy and theology in the world operates, except for Christianity, where under biblical teaching, humanity has value because of the love that God has invested in humanity, and because we are made in some way to be reflections of who God is. We're made in His image, the Bible says. And so it really has nothing to do, our value, our intrinsic objective worth has nothing to do with how well we succeed or not at being good human beings, that we have this great value that God has given us that's is apart from those things. And so this movie didn't provide an answer to that. It didn't. I kind of expected, I was waiting for someone to give that, positive, let's lift ourselves up by our bootstraps message of we can do better, we can choose to be good, and stuff like that. That's very often what you'll see when that kind of complaint against humanity is raised in fiction. But it was kind of an unanswered criticism of humanity in this movie. So, but yeah, I think you really have to be stretching and reaching for this movie to naturally, I think, bring some of those thoughts to mind for consideration. All right, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Pater. I would pretty much say skip on this one. Trust your instincts after watching the trailer. It really is the shockingly cheap-looking movie that the trailer suggested it was, despite the familiar stars that are involved. On the other hand, it's so interesting to look at this and try to figure out why these actors were a part of this project. I mean, I would love to dig around on the internet and find out the story behind each of them deciding to be a part of it. It's really, really interesting on that meta level. Anyway, it's rated R for language throughout and some bloody violence. All right, those are my thoughts. I would love to get yours in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. Anything you want to do to share this content and help others who would be interested in it get connected to it, I would be really grateful for. And I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. For more info about the exclusive benefits of being an insider, you can go to patreon.com/SpiritBladeProductions. And as always, I hope you'll join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.